All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Sanjana, and I'm joined here with Christina for another Fireside chat. Christina, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me, Sanjana. I'm delighted. I love these fireside chats, and it was fun to even watch some of the previous ones as I was thinking and preparing for this one.
I'm so glad to hear that. Thank you so much. So, to get us started, can you please tell us about your educational and professional backgrounds and the path that you took to get to where you are today?
Sure. So I studied international business in college, which is one of those fantastic degrees that you can apply really in any which way your heart desires. And that's something that I wish more people knew and thought about. So it's sometimes you don't have to be so specific unless you're going into things like medicine or law. But for me, international business was it gave me exposure to a lot of different aspects of the business world. I when I was in college, there were a lot of things that I was involved in. And I'm one of those fortunate individuals that actually got to do right at graduation what I was studying. So my first job out of school was working for a small private bank on Wall Street. I got to do what's referred to as global custody. So I handled some of the relationships with our offshore banks and mutual funds and pension funds. So right out of school, I got to go to amazing places like the Caribbean and Canada and South America and different parts of Latin America. And it was international business. So I had that perfect application. I'll tell you though, there was so much about that role that I loved and a lot that I didn't, to be honest. And I was always taught that you should really pay attention to what gives you energy, what kind of day-to-day experiences you want to have. So even right out of school in that first position that I had for that first couple of years as an adulting professional, if you will, I really thought about, I love the relationship management of aspect of it. I love that no one day was just like the other. And I took that and really thought about, okay, where do I want to apply my interests? From working at a small private bank doing international business, I actually pivoted significantly and went into pharma and biotech, where I ended up spending the next 20 years, just over 20 years. And it was around relationship management. So I went into sales first. And I really enjoyed that. It was a lot of what I had liked in my previous job. And then every time I got into a new opportunity, it gave me exposure to different parts of this industry and different roles that I could be taking on and different things that I really enjoyed. And again, what brought me energy. So I went from being a salesperson to a sales leader. I really loved inspiring and working with and mentoring others and bringing the best out of them. From there, I went into training and education because it's a little bit more of the same. Like, how are we making sure people can access their skills and their attributes and bring as much value as possible? And then I had this moment where I understood and was given visibility to the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is what I get to do now. So I am the head of DE&I and engagement for a large global organization, actually pivoting back to financial services. But before I get to where I am today, I'll tell you, it was this moment of, oh my gosh, I can't believe that there are roles within organizations where this is their sole focus. So as soon as I discovered DE&I made it my mission to try to get to do that for my full-time job. So as I was taking on different positions within pharma and biotech, I would, what I call now is my side hustle. I would call someone and say, I understand you're leading our diversity, equity, and inclusion council. How can I help you? Can I be your chief of staff? Can I do strategy and operations, all as like voluntary sort of side projects? And you would be amazed at how many people will take you up on that offer. I wish it's something that I knew earlier. So like immediately I will tell you that if there's something that you like, a job that you think is interesting or a skill that you think you want to pick up, reach out to the person doing it, ask them, how can you help? What can you do to bring value to that effort? And because I did that, and I did that on a pretty regular basis, it took me longer than I would have liked. It took me about 5 or 6 years, but I was eventually able to, when I saw a role in diversity, equity, and inclusion, I posted for it. It was with a different company, but I was able to say, I don't do this today, but here are all the ways that I've gotten really close to this work and really close to this function. Here are some tangible things that I've done to prove to you that I could do the job that you're hiring for. And then I was able to make that transition. And from there, I sort of never looked back. And that was just over, 6 years ago now. And I've been working in DE&I ever since. Today, my role is, as I mentioned, to lead this effort for a global asset management firm back in financial services. So it's been just over a year. But that's the work that I'm doing now. So it's a little full circle. I started in private banking, I started on Wall Street, and now I'm back in the asset management world after being in pharma for 20 years. So you can make big shifts and big changes just so long as you're always eyes wide open and you're listening to what you're enjoying and sort of crossing off the list what you don't in the process. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, that was such a lovely story. And I love that you mentioned, taking initiative is just so important because you never know what's out there. Like you said, you really tried and put all your effort into exploring new things, exploring the world of DEI, and that got you to, a place where you're doing something you love. So that's just so important. And I'm really glad you hit on that. Thanks for sharing.
Of course.
All right. So thinking back to high school and college, did you have any significant extracurricular experiences that you feel really helped you on later in your career?
I did. I was one of those students that was involved in a lot of extracurricular activities. We'll put athletics aside for a moment. I was a cheerleader. I very much consider that to be a sport. I grew up in Florida, where that is 100% a real sport. But let's put athletics aside for a second. I think as I reflect on it, one is perhaps super obvious, the other less so. I was very involved in student council. So that's the more obvious one. I think through student council, student government, those kinds of efforts, you gain a lot of experience in leadership, influencing others, understanding how to set objectives and create a path and a plan against those objectives and making it happen. It also gives you a chance to work with a lot of different people, administration, teachers, different students, different classmates. So that was obviously very, very beneficial. I did it for my school, and then I also did it for my county. So, growing up in Florida, it's a little bit different than in New Jersey, where here everything is very locally focused. But I love the part where I got to work with other high school students in the same situation. Super helpful. I was also part of Future Business Leaders of America. And, I think that for obvious reasons gives you terrific exposure and a lot of the skills that I draw on as a professional. Maybe the less likely avenue, and one that I think is probably more evident in my everyday than anything else, is I was in drama and I was in plays, and both musicals and straight plays. And so I was part of our thespian troupe. I think that has probably influenced my presentation skills, how I communicate, given me confidence in ways that I could not have imagined, because you're literally putting yourself out there all the time. And one of the things that's very frequently commented on in areas that I get a lot of feedback on is how at ease I appear when I'm in front of a room. And that doesn't mean whether it's an actual room in real life or now as we're doing things like we are in Zoom and WebEx and that kind of thing. But man, that drama muscle that I got to really hone in high school has been hugely helpful. And then I did some of that in college. I was a student senator in college. But those are my extracurriculars that I probably draw on constantly.
No, absolutely. I've done 2 out of 3 of the things that you mentioned, 2 out of 4, I guess, with cheer. And I totally agree. Communication, no matter what field you're in, is so, so important, whether it's just talking to your boss or colleagues, or like you said, talking in front of a room and being really influential. So I think just in any way that you can, anyone listening out there, if you're in high school, middle school, if you can get involved in things that just really help you with your presence, as you mentioned, it'll just make the world of a difference. So
Yeah.
thank
And
you.
especially as you get to pick electives, I think about one of my most favorite classes in college was a class called oral interpretation. And it was a tiny little class of 20 of us. And we got to do things like speech exercises and things that actors and performers and journalists do to prepare when they're going on stage or on camera. Silly, right? When you think about it. But I think back to that class all the time. We had to read children's stories and we had to learn how to project our voice to the back of the room and how do you stand and what are what are the ways you need to be thoughtful about your presence and how you take up space. So I would also encourage, if there's an elective that sounds interesting and maybe not something that you would like necessarily naturally gravitate towards, go for it if it's about communication, because it will really help you. Why not work all those kinks out when you're in high school or you're in middle school or you're in college? Because I guarantee it's going to help you later.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you mentioned, like there's so many little intricacies with communication, like projection and just how you come across. And that's a great point. I think it's just very important to know how you deal with all of that and like how it comes across from you as an individual, and just honing it and enhancing it.
Mhm.
All right. So lastly, to wrap up this session, what advice would you give to young students who will be embarking on their professional lives soon?
This is a fun question. I don't think we listen to ourselves enough, and I don't think we give enough credence to that little voice that tells you, think back to what I said before, like pay attention to what gives you energy. When you're excited in a class or you're excited about a topic and you get feedback from the teacher that either you get a good grade or other people rush to you and say that was really great, Sanjana, like how did you do that, whether it's a particular project or something that you're working on or just a subject that you seem to really soar and it doesn't feel like work when you're studying it. Pay attention to that. Pay attention to what brings you joy, what brings you energy, and pay attention to what you're good at. Sometimes those are the same things, sometimes they're different. And I think we don't spend enough time just having those conversations. So when they're the same things, that's easy, that's great, that's amazing. And I wish that on everyone. When they're different, let's think about how that might come to life. So if you're really good naturally at math, it just comes easily to you and you always do well there. That might be a clue that you should be thinking about things like finance and accounting or just how that might show up. But if you can marry that with what you love and what brings you joy, so maybe you love listening to music or you love going to shows or you really get into sports. Let's not forget that every sports franchise, every theater, every movie production company has a finance department. So if you can do what you're good at in a space that you love, that's nirvana. And that to me is the advice. So listen with a very open mind and an open heart to what comes up from you. Listen to what other people tell you. Either you're going to start to see patterns like, oh, you're really good at this, or you keep getting really good at grades in there, and then try to marry those things. I don't think you can go wrong. And I don't want to oversimplify, but it's something that I wish more people would talk about in classrooms. And as we engage with students, I think we create this picture in our mind of what the path that we have to take. If that's a path that you take and it is a grind to get up in the morning to go to that class, or it just doesn't make you feel great when you're doing it, think about how you can tweak it and bring some of those other elements in. Because look, we spend a lot of time at work and we spend a lot of time devoted to our professions. And I think more than ever, people have had pandemic epiphanies and said, wow, if I really have to spend this much time away, I should be doing something that sparks joy in some fashion. And for me, the secret sauce is when you can marry what you're good at with what you love.
So true. That was amazing advice. And honest to God, I'm going to be using that as I go forward. Thank you so much for sharing. And thank you just overall for this session. It was amazing.
Well, thank you for inviting me to be a
Of
part of
course.
it. JA does so many wonderful things, and I'm always thankful for any time that I get to spend with JA alums and with students that are going through our programming. So thank you for having me, Sanjana. It was a pleasure.
I appreciate it. And of course, anytime.
Take care.